Good morning. Welcome to A Squared, the show. And today we have Gaurav and Mark from Co-Creation. Let's jump right into it. So, what I want to know is all the time when we're talking about organizations, and we always look at the flaws in businesses and organizations. But what I want to know is what is for you like an ideal? Like, what's an organization you're like, wow, this is a really well-run organization. They're gonna have like they've been doing it for a long time, and they have attributes that are ideals. What do you think those are?
I don't know that there's one right ideal necessarily. I think there's
Hmm.
there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, so to speak. But I think there are general patterns that more higher performing organizations um, tend to have, and so we kind of split that up maybe into four different archetypes or behavioral patterns that are more indicative of a healthy culture that has business performance as well as human well-being. In those four, roughly speaking, are an achievement orientation, a seeking orientation, so continuously learning, a coaching orientation, and then a trust building orientation. And so, depending on the industry and the focus of the organization, they may be stronger or less strong in any one of those dimensions. But those are kind of the four behavioral patterns that you could point out in an organization that's healthier. And then there's a range of other patterns that kind of are signs of less than strong health or some dysfunction, and we can get into some of that. Garv, what would you say?
You're the smart one. You gave all the answers.
Perfect. Done. Okay. Thank
um,
you. You're coming
yeah.
around.
So I'm curious because it sounds like you have these patterns, and um, they're easy to see, right? But most companies, they don't last that long, right? I thought you said the average is like 30 years or something for a company. And so, why is it that they're getting stuck and not able to get past this plateau into becoming a really healthy, long-lasting organization? Like these
Mm.
are ideals, but what is the difference between the expectation and the current, um, you know, outcomes?
Yeah, I've got a few theories, but Gaurav, why don't you share
Sure.
yours?
So, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, so the average life of companies is I think you're right about. I think it's now 18 years, not even 30, and it's been coming down. And interestingly enough, the first thing that I think is the driving that is actually a very short term orientation and an orientation towards speed and an orientation to trying to get everything done right here, right now, versus a long term perspective. Which, if you then try and dig below that, the lack of long term perspective and the short term perspective is because everything is about instant gratification and about the fear of failure, and it's actually a dysfunctional relationship around definition of success and definition of failure that leads to actually organizations not being very effective.
I see what you're saying. It sounds like it's more of a human flaw too, because we all seek short-term gratification too, and so
Yeah,
it is challenging to think of it as a more long-term thing. So I'm curious, if I were to say what is a successful business or a successful organization, how would you define that?
Mark, you want me to go? You want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I'll sure. Let's make this a back and forth here, but I think it varies by organization. I think every organization has to define for themselves what is success. So in some ways, the success means the organization is meeting its own definition or standard of success. It's fulfilling its mission. It's realizing um, its vision, and it's doing that in a very comprehensive, not a narrow focused way, but a comprehensive way. I think to get back to the idea of short termism, I think there's a very related uh, challenge of organizations focusing solely on financial results and outcomes, and missing out on the holistic set of things. Organizations don't just exist to make money; they exist to do something in the world. There's a lot of ways to make money, but they exist to do something positive and constructive in the world. And so if that organization is having the impact in the world that they want to have, then I would consider that success. But there's a lot of stakeholders
Hmm.
and other people, there's I don't think it's a one right answer about what success means. I think it's an ongoing conversation, frankly, amongst people within an organization, but also other stakeholders outside of an
Would you say
organization as
like
well.
there is a certain type of cause that can rally and motivate employees better than others? In a way, the success, I believe, in my opinion, is heavily relied on the actual like the actual labor force of that organization, and with the proper administration, they can provide these employees with like a certain type of cause or something that they can rally behind, which can be even the theme of the organization itself.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think generally speaking, yeah, go ahead, go.
yeah. I mean, so say that's a great point. I mean, if you think about what gets people excited, especially, I mean, and different generationally,
Yeah.
it's different, right? But the single biggest source of energy for an organization is
Yeah.
meaning. And its meaning is not alignment on meaning, but it's actually getting sparked by meaning. And if you think about the purpose of organizations, the purpose of organizations is not to make money. The purpose of organizations is to serve the
Hmm.
community and the planet on which it exists. That's what sparks excitement in the organization. Organizations that recognize that, realize that money is a benefit from actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, versus money is the primary reason why they exist. And going back to Ali, what you were saying, therefore, the primary dysfunction that organizations suffer from is they've forgotten what their primary purpose is, and that leads to people in the organization not getting excited, communities being suspicious of organizations, um, and organizational leaders being inordinately focused on money for themselves as well as for the organization.
Mm. Yeah. And
Hmm.
and
And it seems like money isn't, yeah, the
yeah, it's not the right
everything,
meaning
right?
exactly.
Exactly. There is more to success than just money.
Yeah,
Hmm.
money is a result of doing things right rather than the
Mm.
primary reason you
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah, and there's
Wow.
a bit of a paradox here though too if you think of human motivation in organizations, because you can motivate people in the short term with a lot of fear or the sense of scarcity or the
Hmm.
survival orientation. And that applies to profit driven organizations, but also nonprofits and in government agencies. And the organizations we see that really aren't performing well or aren't taking care of humans or human well-being are ones that really have this survival orientation. There's a lot of fear, and there's this sense or this belief, which is actually partially correct among leaders, that in order to motivate people, I need to scare them. I need to create or generate fear because that's the only way people will move, and that's it's actually right. But what happens is it creates a lot of stress, a lot of burnout, and it becomes less
Yeah.
effective over time. So what Gaurav said is, if you can tap into that meaning and create energy without fear, that actually leads to those
Hmm.
patterns we talked about before about a more
And what
ideal
kind of
organization.
organizations would you guys say have the provide the best meaning to their employees? Because obviously, employees are each individual is different, and they might be motivated by different values or different incentives. So maybe there's like a specific or like a genre of organizations that do it the best.
So actually, say there is no
Yeah.
specific genre, right? I mean, let's think about what motivates human beings, right? And we often ask this in organizations, and we say there are five levels of five
Hmm.
different motivations. One is societal contribution. The other is contribution to your customers. The third is contribution to the organization you work in. The fourth one is your co-workers. Then the fifth one is yourself and your
Hmm.
own well-being. And different people are in different places, but the great combination of what we call a cathedral story, a story that gets people to say, yes, I want to go beyond, above and beyond what I do, is one that combines some measure of societal and customer contribution with team and myself. What's in it for me? And you have to aim at both levels, both of these slightly seemingly disparate pieces, in order to create something that sparks employees and sparks people who work within a
Yeah,
system.
for sure.
Yeah, which creates some interesting challenge. We do a fair amount of work with nonprofits, and their organizational purpose is societal contribution. You would think these people would be crazy motivated. At some level, they are motivated for the societal contribution, but oftentimes you find if the organization isn't taking care of people, their coworkers, and if people don't feel like they're taking care of themselves, it's very hard for them to focus their energy on that societal contribution. And so that's why it's hard to say, hey, there's a genre of organization or a type of organization that motivates people in a particular way. It's really how the organization is run that determines whether people motivate. And I've seen organizations that do just really transactional sort of manufacturing, but the people are really fired up because they feel like they're well taken care of, and they feel like whatever small thing they're doing is making a difference in the world. And so it just depends on how you interpret what's going on, really.
Oh, wow. Um, we need you guys really, and everything you're saying, I love it. And in the world right now, there's, I'm sure you guys know about quiet quitting, where more and more and more people are doing the same job, but they're doing the bare minimum because they don't. I don't know. Why are they doing the bare minimum? What's your theory on it? And how do we get out? Like, I love my job. I wake up. I love. I'm a behavior analyst. I love what I do, helping people out, and my coworkers. All these things you're talking about. Now I see it. Now that you guys describe it, society, coworkers, myself, improvement. Um, but yeah, why is it that many people are quiet quitting right now? It's a huge boom in our culture.
Love it. Gaurav, why don't you start and I'll jump in.
So I have few hypotheses. Who knows? I mean, what goes on inside people's heads? Um, but I think, I think there is. I don't think people have. Well, let me step back. Let me say that often people are not going to work for the right reasons.
Hmm.
People are going to work because they want to survive. So the same conversation we had about organizations, because they feel that they need to do that in order to make the money to take care of their family and so on and so forth, versus they're doing it because they love their job. Now you layer on top of that something like COVID, which, by the way, the work from home has some tremendous advantages, but we as human beings were fundamentally oriented to be in connection with each other, and constantly being on a two-dimensional process of being on screens is not the way human beings were meant to be. So now the team aspect gets disconnected. You don't have meaning in what you're doing. That leads to quiet quitting, which is, I'll do the bare minimum because actually I separate my work from my life, and I'll enjoy life, and I'll go to work just to make sure that I can enjoy life. The problem is that work and life are not separate. And we think we can create that separation, but actually it's impossible to do.
I I kind of want to look at it from the
Yeah, can you elaborate on that a bit
yeah.
more? Sorry, I'm just. I know. I know what you're like. We wake up each day. We have something to do, right? This is our purpose in life, to do our jobs, right? We're here to serve a role, and but a lot of our generation is really want to separate work from life. They
Yeah.
say, "Oh, I'm off the clock," or and sometimes it is a struggle. There are people that are having struggles separating it. They think about work way too much, or yeah, they're having a lot of mental health issues because of not being able to separate work from life. Um, so how do you? Yeah, what's your explanation on how? But you're saying that your work is your life.
No, I'm not saying your work is
Explain.
your life. I'm
Hmm.
saying that there is that to put your life in boxes is not possible, because one bleeds into the other. What you're feeling at work bleeds into your personal life. What you're feeling in your personal life bleeds into
Mhm.
your work. In the, back in 20 years ago, or even now, we used to be told when I initially started working, that you're supposed to check your emotions at the door when you walk into work. It's not possible. Similarly, you can't lock your work in a lockbox and not let it influence your personal life. So if you don't get joy from your work, that bleeds into your personal life. If you don't get joy in your personal life, that bleeds into your work. So you have to go find something that gives you joy, rather than think that one is for money, one is for joy, and it just doesn't work, because frustration from work always
You
bleeds
know, it's
in.
interesting that you say that, since
Yeah.
I feel nowadays, especially now that we have more opportunities to create something for ourselves and find our own jobs, I feel like the role of an entrepreneur has increased drastically in the past 30 years, and people are just finding a way to not necessarily work with one place for the rest of their lives. Maybe they'll like start off for 10 years, gather some collateral or have some savings so that they can invest in themselves and their own businesses. And it's interesting the
Yep,
different markets that you can go into nowadays.
yep. Mark,
Yeah,
any thoughts?
yeah, I think there's a lot of yeah. I mean, it's an interesting economy and world.
Hmm.
There are a lot of opportunities and probably more entrepreneurial opportunities, probably than ever before. And yet, there still is this phenomenon of quiet quitting in many organizations where people aren't taking that step to realize those opportunities. So, to build on what Gaurav was saying a little bit, I think there is that the patterns you have in your personal life, translate into your work life and back and forth. I think part of the issue or challenges with quiet quitting is there's this story that people have in their mind, why bother? And that story is sort of taken root. And they sort of feel like, hey, I'm really a victim of any of these external circumstances. And there's oftentimes a story about, well, whatever I do doesn't matter. And so why bother? And so I give up and I quit quietly and I do the absolute bare minimum and I just get by and I take my paycheck and keep moving on. And so part of the work we do in organizations is to help people realize what these stories are, that are influencing, and our beliefs that are influencing how they show up in life. And we, help them see, do you want to choose that story? Or is there a different story that you can embrace, or different mindset that would allow you to create more joy and more opportunities in your life, right? And one of those choices may be, no, I don't want to live this way, and I want to take some entrepreneurial opportunity, or I want to challenge the status quo in my current work world. So it really kind of gets back to fundamental life orientation and belief system that leads people to quietly quit, and we need to challenge that as human
Yeah.
beings.
And side to your point about, I mean, the only thing I would say about being entrepreneurial is also not a bed
Yeah.
of roses, right? So there are fears. Yeah, there are fears that come with entrepreneurialism as well, which is there's uncertainty because there's not a steady source
Yeah.
of income. And so the point is that irrespective of what you choose in life, it'll bring with it its own challenges. And the difference between people who have joy in their life versus people who don't is that the people who don't have joy in their life, when they're faced with challenges, they get stuck in the why is this happening to me, and oh poor me and woe is me. The people who are joyful look at those challenges as a learning opportunity and say, wow, it's here. Now, what do I do with it that allows me to go to the next step?
Okay.
And we in our work call it the difference between showing up as a victim versus being in mastery, which is yes, life is difficult, shit happens. Now, what do you do with that shit? Do you collapse into it, or do you use it as thought and real insight for you to grow and evolve? Because that's what joy is about. It's about constant evolution, constant growth, constant, you know,
And what
expansion.
is the challenge that you guys together have faced and then overcome that have has maybe taught you like the most important lesson so far as being on co-creations together?
Hmm. Yeah, well, it's interesting. We talk about these patterns in organizations, but we
Exactly.
experience them ourselves, right? We recently Gaurav and I wrote a book, for instance, and so we were challenged to um, in many ways, like we're identified with our own way of working or our own ideas, and so to come together and sort of both have a point of view, but also learn how to talk about it with each other and to let go a little bit and release into that creative process has actually been really, really hard. And so we've had to learn ourselves how to not just talk about this work, but really,
Mhm.
apply it. It's quite easy and very human. And it all happens to us to fall back into that, victim mindset and be like, oh, the problem's not with me. It's with these this other guy is really messing up my stuff. And so, you know, shifting out of that and saying, hey, what can I learn in this, and how can I be more effective in communication is really has been a valuable lesson. And I think the book writing process that Gaurav and I went through is a great example of that. And there's others that we have.
Yeah, I mean, the other one I'd say is Ali. We were discussing that you have all those flight safety things behind you, and so part of the nature of our work pre-COVID was that 100% of our work happened at our clients, and suddenly COVID happened, and there was no travel possible, and our business goes from 100 to
Oh
0
God.
overnight,
Yeah.
right? And one response could have been, "Oh my God, we are screwed. It's over. We need to shut this down." And that would have been the victim response. The response in mastery was, and it took some time. I have to tell you, for 2 months, we were like, man, what are we going to do? To getting to a place where we completely reinvented our offering to make it virtual. As Mark said, we wrote a book. We used that time to actually figure out how do we reinvigorate ourselves? How do we reinvent ourselves? How do we present ourselves in a way that allows us to be able to move with what life is giving us? And it was a tremendously joyful process. But we had to go through our own pain first and our own, oh my God, what is going to happen before we could do anything.
Mhm.
So let's talk about fear for a second. You were saying our lives are driven by fear. A lot of our motivations are driven by fear. We do things because we're scared or we're in survival mode. And it becomes habitual, especially in organizations, right? You're scared of many things, scared of losing money, scared of the boss, scared of there's just fear all around many organizations. Okay. And it's such a behavioral pattern too. So how do you even it's one thing to break the cycle and for it to last a little bit, for how do you break the cycle and then make it last, and so that it really transforms, and so you're no longer motivated by fear, but motivated by all these other positive incentives that you talked about earlier. How's this even possible?
Beautiful. First thing you do is go buy a book called Unfear. That's the first step.
Yes, we should have. Yes, exactly.
No, but
It's a great
seriously,
question, though. Yeah.
that's seriously
Hmm.
very valid question. And I'll give a few thoughts and then I'll give it over to Mark because this is what Mark and I live for, right? Because this is our key topic. So the first step is to shift your relationship with fear, which is to understand that fear, like any other emotion, is just an emotion. It's the meaning you make out of that fear, which is either a strength or a problem, right? So, unfear, the book title as a verb, what it means is to reframe your relationship with fear and to use it as a way of uh, training, learning, and growth. Now, how do you do that? The first step is to believe that you are capable of doing it. Most of us live with a label that I am limited and restricted and incapable. And that is a real powerful, it's almost a deeply spiritual concept, which you have to reconnect with, which is we as human beings are not here to prove our worth. We are already worthy because we are human beings. And from that place, we can make things happen. And then and only then you can move forward with mindfulness and reflection and slowing down a little that allows you to then live in joy. But Mark, let me give it to you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think the other part is, I mean, just to build on what you're saying, Gaurav, is the idea isn't to get rid of fear, it's to create some space or separation between the experience, the inevitable experience we will have of fear, anytime we're at the edge of, our comfort zone or facing uncertain situations, which is just life, from the reaction, the behavioral pattern that results. And so if you can bring more awareness to your own experience, emotional experiences, and not slip right back into your conditioned pattern, you now have a choice to say, hey, what can I learn from this, and what can I do to be more effective in this particular moment. And so that's really the skill set that has to result, is there's space between the emotion and the behavior that results. It's not
So
inevitable.
so Ali, let me take over your podcast now and do something.
Oh wow. Okay.
You're on the
I
show
didn't see
now,
this
man.
coming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So here we go. So often in our work in organizations and with people, we do the following exercise. So let me ask
Mhm.
you, Ali, who are you? Who
Oh,
are you?
Oh wow.
come on, Ali.
I'm Ollie. Um,
That's your name.
who
Who are
am I?
you?
Yes, who am I? Oh man. Um, I'm Ollie. Um, Today I woke up. I had some coffee. I went outside. And, I made some shawarma in the morning. I pre prepped it, and then I started this
Habibi,
podcast.
that's Habibi, you're doing what you do. That's not who you are. That's what you did today. So who are you?
Um, I am. Wow. Um, I am. It's a tricky
It's
one.
all
I
right.
wasn't. This is not prepared. This is how you know I'm on the spot.
Of course.
If you ask me like a serious question, if I were so like I would say
Seriously,
that I yeah I am maybe my consciousness maybe, and my consciousness is built off my entire life's experience of everything I've experienced, all the accumulations of
beautiful,
um,
beautiful.
yeah, everything I've seen and done, and they've developed into my mind, which is what I use to experience the world. Yeah.
Beautiful. So let me flip this on its head. So I like the first part of the answer, which is your consciousness. Everything else happens in consciousness, right? Your experiences, all of those things happen in consciousness. So this is the fascinating idea for this fear conversation, which is as consciousness, you are bigger than any emotion you ever experience, bigger than any qualities that you have, bigger than any stories that you create in your head around what life is. And from that place of consciousness, you can do anything you want with fear because you're bigger than your fear. You're bigger than whatever label you give yourself because you are consciousness. And that's a very profound idea to really reflect on. Because when you get to that place, then you realize, oh my God, fear is just one of the 12 juices of life, and there are 12 different emotions. And it's just another thing. It's just a thing that I experience rather than it's something that should control me or drive me or I need to react to it in a certain way.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
that's the fun part. But I love the way you got to consciousness because when very few people do. Very few
Oh
people
wow.
do get there. So good on
Wow.
you.
Yeah, thank you. I have maybe I'll share my experience with fear. I've had anxiety maybe in the past. When I was a kid, I used to be in the same school as Said. I used to get really nervous and I'd blush and I'd get red. They used to call me the tomato. Yeah, because I was very pale and I'd get red. And I'd be like, more. I was more of a nervous type. And then yeah, just as the things I've done and the more I've learned, and I think just my own perception of fear. I read somewhere that fear and anxiety are have the same expressions as excitement, and that they're pretty much one and the same. And once I just reframed the fear into excitement, now not really, I'm not scared of anything anymore. It's just that was one of the big things. And that I also learned that a lot of the times you're scared of things that will never even happen. You're scared of this thing that might happen in the future, but 90% of the time it doesn't even happen. So you're scared
Yeah.
for no reason, you know?
Yeah.
And so all of that put
That's a good
together makes
insight.
it, why do you even need to be scared? Like, what is the point of fear? Why do just let it go? Or what should we do with fear?
Yeah, I love
It's
that. I love
it's
that.
just a
And
story.
yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. It's a story. I mean, fear. There's two fundamental kinds of fear. Evolutionary biology says fear is a really important emotion because it helps us fight, flight, and freeze in the face of physical threats. But most of the threats we experience in life aren't physical threats, right? When you're experiencing anxiety, when you get up in front of a room to speak, for instance, your physical body isn't being threatened. But what is? I mean, it's really the story you're telling about yourself and what might happen in the world, right? So all this and our projection into the future and the past, it's all stories that we're telling ourselves. And so, we have some influence over those stories. We can reframe it, just like you said, right? Anxiety could also be seen as excitement because I care about this outcome and I care about how I'm talking, connecting with people. And so there's always that reframe when you're experiencing emotional fear versus physical fear that is possible, and that's what the shift from fear to learning is all about, is learning how to
Yeah.
reframe that.
Something that I'd add to this topic is, so there's this quote that I heard from a psychologist that said, emotions aren't real, they are a reaction to previous trauma. And I can speak on the point of, so how you reframed, Ali, you said you reframed your fear and anxiety into excitement. From my understanding, you were taking the current rush of adrenaline that was going through you, and instead of being afraid of how it's making you feel, it made you feel excited, because the same hormone can make people react differently to it. Same thing applies to like maybe medication or drugs or whatever. People have different reactions to it. It's just about how you put your mindset to react to these things, and that's like why your emotions are just all over the place. You tend to
Yeah.
have some sort of discipline or control.
So, Said, I would say, in order to make it
Yeah.
even more finer, instead of reacting, our invitation is to ask people to
Okay.
respond. Because when you're reacting, it's almost automatic. When you respond, as Mark was saying, you create a space that allows you to
Hmm.
decide how am I going to be effective. So one of the reasons why people get stuck in emotion is because they get into
Yeah.
right and wrong. Oh, it's wrong to feel this way, it's right to feel this way. The question I ask is, what reframe or story you need to create in order to be effective? Who cares whether you are right? You can be 100% right and 0% effective.
Yeah.
Right? And your work in the world is to be effective. So create the story that you need to be effective. And when that story stops being effective, create a new story. Sometimes anxiety might be a really good story to create. Sometimes excitement might be a really
Hmm.
good story to create. Sometimes being completely neutral might be a great story to create. So what is needed in the moment becomes the more important
I really
question.
liked how you separated the
Yeah.
reacting from responding, because yes, reactions are instant and they can also be negative reactions. While when you respond, you actually take your time to process what happened,
Exactly.
and that's how you can get over your anxiety and
And by the
fear.
way, yeah, and by the way, Said, sometimes you might choose to
Yeah.
respond with anger, or but as long as you're being deliberate with it, the anger doesn't control you, but you
Hmm.
control the
Yeah.
anger. The anxiety doesn't control you, but you control the anxiety. Then you can be effective with
Yeah.
it.
It's like you're focusing it.
I think it's important to mention. Yeah. I think it's also important to mention a really important skill set in order to shift from being reactive to responding. It's not enough just to be in your head. And your stories can be, because by the time you're actually telling a
Hmm.
story or trying to reframe, you may already be well into a reaction. And so part of the skill set, which is not taught in most you know um, regular school systems is to really be more in your body and more attuned with the body sensations that are happening. The latest neuroscience and psychology suggests that emotions are really the story we tell after something is going on within our body. And so if you can really tune in any given moment to what's happening in your body, you can sort of get short circuit that cycle of reactivity much sooner and have a much better chance of being responding to any of those circumstances.
Could you explain that a bit more, Mark? Yeah.
Yeah. So anxiety, where do you feel? So Ali, for instance, where do you feel anxiety in your
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and even more precisely,
my breath
what
too,
what
probably.
is
Yeah, exactly.
yeah? What is the feeling in your gut? Is it a sense of tingling, pressure?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Is it like cramps as well?
it just feels like I need to use the bathroom or something, but I don't need to use the bathroom or something like that. Yeah, it feels tense when I feel anxious, and I do notice my breath becomes shorter and just I've been that's how I feel it in my body.
Beautiful. Yeah, and so if you from that space of consciousness as well, you can notice those body sensations without getting so wrapped up in the story around them. And you can also, that gets you a point of choice. If you notice your breath is really shallow, for instance, you can take a deeper breath and bring it deeper into your belly, and you can start to change your physiology, which helps you change your emotions and helps you change how you kind of behave in the world. And so that's part of the game here. That's part of the skill set is to develop that awareness. Gaurav, what would you add to that?
No, I think this is spot on. I'd
Wow.
love to hear what Ali and Said think.
Ali, go ahead.
I was whenever I get anxious, I can notice it. Yeah, the first thing I notice is my physiology. Like I do notice my tightness when when something happens, and okay, it's a bit stressful. The first thing I do is I breathe very deeply. I notice every time I do that a few times. I take deep breaths and deep breaths out, and that always calms me down, a good amount. And that, and then I also do the mindfulness thing, which is I realize that my thoughts are just separate from who I am, and that I can observe these thoughts. And this thoughts of anxiousness is it's kind of wired into me to have these thoughts, but it doesn't mean that they need to control how I behave and such. And so separating from it and not being so impulsive when I do feel that kind of anxiety. Yeah. But my big worry is I'm just, the more I take on responsibility and the more stressful things happen, it's like right now I'm young, whatever, I'm able to deal with all these things, but I can't imagine when I'm older, like you gentlemen, and having to take on more responsibility and doing
Ali, that's not how we speak to guests, man. That's not how we do it.
Shut my camera off, man.
I'm just assuming, okay? Yeah, exactly.
Fair enough. Good assumption.
Yeah, exactly. What am I like? How do you guys deal with it? Like how it's do you still feel scared? Do you still feel the stress? I'm sure, I get stressed about maybe smaller things that aren't that, I know they're kind of meaningless, but that's how my body reacts to it. So I can't imagine if there was a company, that's really relying on you, or COVID or something, and there are people looking out for you. You're responsible for other people, your employees or whatever. How do you is it different than what it was before, or is it the same feeling?
I think there's different worries and stresses that happen over your life. So I have children, so two girls who are 10 and 7, and absolutely, there's all kinds of worries I have, fears about what might happen if, but there's also amazing joys. And so one thing I've learned over time is you can't suppress one emotion without suppressing all other emotions. So part of, perhaps as I've matured a little bit and maybe gained a little bit of wisdom, although Gaurav might think otherwise, is really letting in all those different. It's not about keeping some out or not experiencing fear and all that. It's really about how can you open yourself up to the full spectrum of experiences and realize that the fear I may have or the anxiety I may have about my children also is very much intertwined with the sheer joy I have at just seeing them navigate the world. And they come together. It's a whole package. I can't filter out some and select others. But by letting it all in, it's really much more positive than trying to cram it all down and compress it together. And so, but yeah, to answer your question about the age, I think, yeah, there's different stressors, different life circumstances that may color our experiences. But I think the process of really being attuned to your emotions and just being, yeah, in that more open space is consistent throughout life. It's available throughout our whole life. What would you say, Gaurav?
Yeah, so you still feel it. Um, and it's like if you take care of your body as you grow older, chances are that you don't break down as quickly as if you don't take care of your body. Similarly, if you take care of learning how to manage your emotions and be aware of them, you are much better when you are at a later stage. Your life experiences become your gymnasium to go and prepare you for future challenges. The challenge, unfortunately, is that we have been taught that we have to project to the world and to ourselves this perfect persona of everything is under control. So, what we do is we suppress and we suppress and we suppress. And as life goes on, that suppression, it becomes such a full of pressure, full valve that it explodes. And there, I don't know if you guys have heard, but there are people on the face of it who are super successful people, and the next day they've blown their head away, or they take a gun and they go start shooting other people. Part of that is it's not that your stresses have increased; it's because you've always ignored them.
Mhm.
You've never been taught how to engage with those things in a way. In fact, society doesn't often tells you, "Don't tell me about it," kind of thing. While the gymnasium of life is about actually learning to talk about them, to figure out what does that experience feel like, how do I reframe it, what do I do with it. That's the real challenge. We have not placed enough attention
Yeah.
to our emotional well-being as we have to our physical well-being, and that's what doesn't prepare us as we grow older if we haven't done that.
And just to tie it back to the first question you asked in the podcast, Ali, about what is an ideal organization. Well, I quibble with the word ideal. This is the skill set that we believe is really needed in organizations. Is for lack of a better term, this fullness, this full engagement with the life and getting out of these limiting stories we tell ourselves about fear, what we should be experiencing. And when you can get a critical mass of people in an organization showing up in this way, that's where those behavioral patterns that are really constructive, really conducive to performance and well-being, that's when they start to show up.
Hmm.
And by the way, that doesn't mean that you're perfect. Like, I've been doing this work for 20 years, and in the beginning of January, I was in a session, I was in a conversation which I had deep attachment to, and it wasn't going the way I wanted it to. I was feeling disrespected, and I completely lost it.
Yeah.
And I
I
showed up in
can
a really, really poor way. I mean, no offense, right?
Mark is just watching you this whole time.
I was just observing. It was with lots of curiosity and love. Yeah.
But the point is that if you have done the work, then you are able to recover from
Yeah.
it much faster. You are able to find what did you need to learn from it so that you can
Hmm.
move forward. And I mean, you've had anxiety in your life. If you learn to work with it, it's going to help you as you
Yeah.
get older. Many people who've suppressed their anxiety will not have any idea when the big anxiety comes what to do with it.
That's very true.
So there's real gift in life's experiences.
So what I would like to know is what stresses you guys out? Like what are the little things in life that stresses you out? Now with obviously with experience, you probably mastered a lot of those things and found a way to control them. But is there still anything?
So
Yeah.
I'll tell you a couple.
All kinds. Yeah.
My first one is my older child. Oh, but he's
Yeah.
26 years old, an amazing person, and yet I think because I'm deeply attached to him being
Yeah.
self-sufficient and happy and all of that stuff, I have anxiety around it. The other thing that creates for me stress is anytime I feel I've been disrespected. That's a big,
Okay.
even though I know it's got nothing to do with me, and yet, so I'm usually quite. I'm trying to tune
Mhm.
into that, but sometimes it slips under your skin, and then
Of
it
course.
happens. But the point is, there's no point beating yourself up when you fall. The more you beat yourself up, the more difficult it is to recover from it. I think that's what age teaches you. But there's stresses all the time, man. Sometimes, sometimes I stress about whether I'll be able to pay the mortgage. I mean, yeah, sure. You know, that's life. Sometimes I stress about whether the plane is going to land safely, and I'm on a plane every
Yeah.
week.
And Mark, what about you?
Yeah, yeah, all kinds. How much time do we have left? Yeah, no, all kinds. I mean, yeah, all kinds of stressors. I mean, I think as I've gotten older, I've been able to maybe not be so attached to some of those stressors and um, in life, but they still happen. And if I think the general theme in my life is anything that triggers my sense of I'm
Hmm.
competent can really stress me out. And so, where does that show up in my life now? If I'm in a challenging conversation with someone and I just don't feel really effective or really skilled in getting my point across, wow, that really stresses me out. If we're running a small organization and anytime there's some work ahead of us, but we haven't quite closed a new project or a new deal, that's really
Hmm.
stressing me out because it's I can get stuck in a story of, well, I'm not competent if this doesn't work out, or what if something goes wrong? I'll be miserable and unsuccessful and all this other stuff. And so there's all kinds of stories I've picked up over life that I try not to be so stuck in, but they come up every once in a while. Stressors around my family and my kids, and will they be safe and healthy and successful and all that other
Yeah.
stuff. And so I'm constantly having to get up on the balcony, so to speak, and notice the stories and the emotions and body sensations that accompany all these various life situations, and not get rid of those feelings, but just figure out, hey, what can I do here to be effective in this situation, despite the fact that I'm experiencing this fear, this worry, or
Of
this
course.
doubt. And so that's been the game, and I think it's a lifelong journey too. It's not like you achieve some point where maybe some people do. But I think for most of us, we're human. We're experiencing a lot of things, but we can do something with those emotions. It's not inevitable.
Definitely. Completely agree.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all this. I mean, it's great to learn about your actual thinking and life. And time's up on this podcast. The story I try to tell myself, just share with this with you guys, that I like to see it all as like playful. I like to see life as everything I'm trying to do, all
Mm,
the relationships I have. I'm trying to have fun with it. This podcast, we're not super huge, but
love it.
I'm having a
Yeah.
lot of fun with it. My work, I'm just having fun with it. Just everything in life, I do treat it with that kind of playfulness, and it makes it a lot of fun to do. And then I don't like all these other anxiety or sadness or stress. I don't really deal with it because I'm doing it, and like I'm too busy having fun with what I'm doing to worry about worrying. Yeah. And so that's my perspective. What's your perspective? Leave a comment below. Saeed, you can sign
Guys,
out.
you all know how we do this. Salute to the camera and peace.